graphing trig functions. First important thing to notice is that at the top it says no calculator. You may use a calculator if you would like, provided it is not a graphing calculator.
But you can actually graph these?
Yes, these can be graphed on a graphing calculator, so to ensure that we are graphing them by hand, you may not use your graphing calculators. But if you feel like you might need to do some arithmetic at some point, you may use a calculator as long as it's not graphing. Also, the directions on the review say that you need to draw at least 2 cycles. On the actual quiz, it's going to be slightly different, so we're going to practice the way that it will actually be on the quiz. On the quiz, I am going to provide for you the axes and the scaling for every question, which will usually be from 2 pi to negative 2 pi. And the directions will tell you to fill out as much as is marked. So that's what we're going to practice. So that means you might only do 1 cycle, or you might do 2 cycles, or you might do 8 cycles. You're going to do however much it takes to get you from negative 2 pi to 2 pi. So I'll show you the actual quiz. Actually has those markings on it, and you need to complete from where I've marked out to where I've marked out. So here it is. Here's your quiz. It's 2-sided. There's the other side. There are 10 questions on your quiz. There are 7 questions on our review, but they're all of the same type.
Do we have to fill those blanks too on the quiz?
Yeah, so on the quiz, these blanks will be present, and they are not just to help you out. They will give you hints and reminders about the things you need to consider, but they are also worth points themselves for writing these things out, so you do need to fill in all of the blanks. So for question number 1, what is the amplitude? 1. The amplitude is given by a multiplier in front of the trig function. So since there's nothing in front of sine, the amplitude is 1. Period for sine and cosine. What is the rule? The rule is 2 pi over b, where in this question b is 2, so we get pi. When it says side or up, down, that means, is there any shifting in this one? So is there any shifting in this one? No. Actually write no, or put an X or a slash, something there to let me know that you answered the question, not that you forgot to think about it. Put pi. It's 2 pi divided by b for the period.
Are all these worth points, the top parts?
Yes, each blank is worth a point.
And how much is the graph worth?
1 point for putting information together. And there's 10 questions, so 5 points a problem, 50 points for the quiz.
So, like, if you, like, get all of, like, the amplitudes and everything like that, right? But if you, like, accidentally mess up on the graph, will you, like, just take points off? Or, like...
So if you answer every one of the blanks correctly, but then that information does not transfer into the graph correctly, you will still get all of the points for answering the blanks correctly, so that'd be 4 points correct, and then the 1 point of the graph would be lost. So you'd get 4 out of 5 points for the question. It's a 50-point quiz.
So if we don't do any of the graphs, we could still get like 40?
Yes.
40 out of
If you don't do any of the graphs, you could still get 40 out of 50. You could still get an 80. Because you've already thought about all of the other big information. On the flip side of that, if you do every graph and get every graph totally correct, but don't fill in any of your blanks, you only get a 20%. So fill in the blanks. The shape of the sine graph is what? And it says shape twice because the margins got messed up and that other shape is supposed to be over by question number 2.
So we're going to have to memorize.
Yes, you need to know the shapes of the functions. So now we're ready to plot points. Sine begins in the middle at the origin. At the end of 1 period, it should be back in the middle. The period is pi. In the center, it is in the middle as well. Up first, amplitude of 1, and then down, amplitude of 1. So we get 1 cycle fit within a pi because pi is the period. You need to fill out from edge to edge of the markings, so that means this one will require 4 copies. For number 2, the markings will be the same. For most of the questions, it's going to go negative 2 pi to 2 pi to fill in. For number 2, what is the amplitude? 2. The amplitude comes from a multiplier in the front, but the amplitude is always a positive value because amplitude is a height, and height is positive. Period is going to be what? 2 pi. 2 pi divided by b, and b is just 1 here. Any shifting in this graph? No, there's no adding or subtracting. But the shape, which bumped down to the next line, should belong here, is going to be what?
Down, middle, up, middle.
Down, middle, up, middle, down, because we had a flip. Normally, cosine begins in the up position, but that negative in front of the 2 flips this graph upside down and changes the shape of the graph. So we're going to begin in the down position, amplitude of 2. After 1 period length, so at 2 pi, it will be in the down position again. Halfway between it will be up. And in between those, we'll have our middles. So this one is going to require 2 cycles to fill out the given space. Remember that your graph should be more curvy than pointy. And that on cosine you need to be careful of the tails, that the tails are pointing in the right direction. That would continue on to make a new function.
Is it doomed or whatever because it's the negative in front?
Yes, it begins in the down position because the negative in the front. Normally cosine begins in the up position, but a negative a value flips it upside down.
Okay.
Questions on either of these? Okay. For number 3, what's the amplitude? 1. There's no multiplier in front of sine, so we have an amplitude of 1. Period. Pi. 2 pi over b, and b is 2 in this one. So period is 2 pi over 2, or just pi. Shifting. Up 1. Give me some sort of indicator of direction, either the word up or an arrow that points up, and then how much shifting, so 1. I would rather ups or downs than pluses or minuses. And shape of sign?
Middle up, middle down.
Middle up, middle down, middle. So first thing we need to do in our graph is take care of that shifting. Up 1 line to make a new middle. Then sign begins in the middle. At the end of 1 period, which is pi, it is back in the middle. And in the center, it crosses through the middle. Going up, amplitude of 1 first, and then down. So 1 full cycle fits within pi, since that's the period. So that means that we're going to need 4 cycles. This graph should look exactly like number 1, just bumped up 1 spot. They had the same period, they had the same amplitude, they were both sines. We just have that shift up of 1 spot. Questions?
Don't you only have to go twice?
You need to go from the edge of the markings to the edge of the markings, and most of them will be marked from negative 2 pi to 2 pi.
Oh, so it's not just 2.
So it's not just 2 cycles like the homework. It's as many as it takes to get you across the grid. Number 4, amplitude is what? 1. Period is 2 pi. 2 pi over b, and there's no b value, so it's just 2 pi. Shifting.
To the right, pi half.
to the right of pi halves. Sideways shifting happens in parentheses with the x, and it goes backwards of what it says. So when we subtract, we go to the right. When we add, we go to the left. So we're going to go to the right of pi halves. Shape of cosine?
Up, middle, down, middle.
Up, middle, down, middle, up. So we take care of shifting first. So I'm going to go over to half of pi and put a new starting line. Then cosine begins in the up position on that starting line. At the end of one period, which should be 2 pi away from the starting line, it should be up again. So it's not above the 2 pi, it's above where 2 pi would be bumped to. So it's like 2.5 pi, which is maybe kind of right on the edge of the paper, maybe slightly off the paper. So instead of going in the right direction first, I'm going to go back on the negative side in the left direction, because I can go 2 pi away over there, and I would be up above negative 1.5 pi. Halfway between there, I would be in the down position, and in the middles there, I would cross over. So I chose to go backwards instead of forwards first on this one so I could get one full cycle in. And now I can kind of look at what's happening here. Where's this graph crossing the x-axis? At negative pi and at 0. So it looks like it's crossing at every pi. So I know it's going to cross at pi, and it's going to cross at 2 pi, and it's going to cross at negative 2 pi. And then I can just kind of connect my dots. So this one does have 2 cycles, but they're kind of segmented. So we have one full cycle in the middle and then a couple of partials on the sides. If you graph beyond what is marked out, that's fine. I won't deduct. So if you took this all the way out to the 2.5 pi, if there was room, that's fine. But if you don't go all the way to the edge of what's marked, I will deduct.
What if I just move the starting line to the middle?
I'm providing the axes, so you can't move the original axes. So yeah, you can't kind of recenter it. Number 5 is a tangent graph. When we graph tangent, it will probably only be marked from negative pi to pi. So tangent, I won't give you as much to fill in. With tangent, we don't really talk about amplitude, because amplitude means height, and these are infinitely tall, but there is still a height that's important, the height of the points that we plot, which is what here? 1. But I want to remind myself that there's a negative involved in this, that we're going to have that flip. If you didn't write that out, that's fine. I'm just kind of writing myself a mental note there. If I were taking the quiz, I need to write myself as many mental notes as I possibly can once I go to put all of this stuff into the graph, so I don't forget about something. So height is still 1, just like amplitude's always positive, but there is a flip that's happening. What is the rule for period of tangent?
Pi over.
Just pi over b. Sine and cosine is 2 pi over b. Tangent is just pi over b. This is one of the biggest mistakes that students will make on this quiz, is doing 2 pi over b for everything, or doing pi over b for everything. Sine and cosine are 2 pi over b. Tangent is pi over b. So this one is just pi. Any shifting for this one?
To the right.
Down 2. Even though it's right next to the x, it's not gathered in parentheses with the x. So it's a vertical shift. The only time it will go to the sides is if there's parentheses connecting it with the x.
What's the A and B?
A in this problem would be 1, and B would be 1. Asymptotes. How do we find the asymptotes of a tangent graph? Half of the period. So we take the period and multiply it by 1/2. So we get pi over 2. First thing we graph is any shifting. This graph goes down 2 spots to create a new middle.
So the asymptote is the period divided by 1/2?
The asymptote is the period divided by 2 or multiplied by 1/2.
What is the asymptote
The asymptotes are the first thing we put onto our graph, and those are what give us our boundaries that the line will follow along. So I'm going to go out to 1/2 of pi for pi over 2 on each side and put my boundary lines. Then we graph 3 points for tangent, a point right in the center, which would be on that new middle line. Then halfway between that point and the asymptote, we put a point at the height of the first point, but this has a flip, so as I go to the right, it's down, and left is up. So our graph begins up and ends down because of that flip. Then we have not completely filled in from edge to edge. The width between the asymptotes is the length of the period, which is pi. So I would need to go pi away from one side to get another asymptote. So I could go beyond what is marked and do a full cycle, which is fine. Or you could choose to not go beyond the markings and just do partial cycles, would be fine. But if partial cycles look confusing to you and you would rather just go beyond markings and complete out a full cycle, that's fine. So on this one, you could have 3 full cycles, or it would be totally acceptable as well to just have the cycle in the middle and the 2 partials, because that does go completely from what's marked out to what's marked out. But if you give me extra, I won't mark you down.
You say 2 parts.
The 2 parts that I highlighted in brown. So you could have the full one in the center and then just the lower half and upper half of the other. Or you could have the complete cycles. Yes.
So like for like this, you only need two cycles?
Well, you need 1 and 2 halves. So it's 2 cycles, but we need to have a half on each side at least, because we need to go all the way to the markings.
Yeah.
For number 6, what is the height? 1. The period. Pi over 2. The b value is 2. Pi over b, so pi over 2. Any shifting? No. Asymptotes. Pi over 4, 1/2 of the period. So in our graph, we need to take the pi's and cut them into 4 pieces. We're going to go 1 pi/4 piece away from the center on each side to make asymptotes. We have a point at the origin. And our point's at height 1, halfway between the center and the asymptotes. The width of the asymptotes is 1/2 of pi, which is 2 markings, since each marking is a quarter. So I can go markings away and make another asymptote and another copy of the 3 points. But that still didn't take me quite all the way to pi. So this is where you could choose to either go beyond the marking and make another full cycle, or you could just make a half cycle. And likewise, going back the other way, I get 1 more full cycle, and I could get 1 more partial or another full. So you either need to have 3 fulls and 2 halves, or 5 fulls to completely cover your markings. You do not have to go beyond the marking. You have to go to the markings.
What does the period do in this?
The period is the length between the asymptotes.
So you don't, it's not graphed at all.
It is graphed to make your copies. That's how you determine how far to go to make your next asymptote. If you do the 5 full cycles, that's fine. You can go beyond the markings, but you need at least 3 and 2 partials. 5 would be fine.
If you go past the markings, would it be
It would be 5 full cycles.
So it has
then.
to be like that on our quiz.
I know, I still, for the last one, for 5, if I did this for the quiz, would that be acceptable?
No, because you haven't gone all the way past that marking. On this one, we have more room. You would be given bigger markings. So on this one, we're going to go out to 3 pi. And remember, that's not a choice that you will make. The markings will be provided for you, and you just need to go as far as they go. Amplitude. 3. Period. 2 pi. 2 pi divided by b, and b is 1. Shifting. Up to and to the right pi. Shape.
Middle up, middle down, middle.
Take care of shifting first. So I'm going to go up 2 and to the right a pi to create a new starting line and a new middle line. The shape of sign begins in the middle, so it will meet where those 2 shift lines intersect. The period length is 2 pi, so it should end 2 pi away from the start. So that is not at 2 pi, that is at 3 pi. 2 pi away from the start. In the center, it is in the middle. Halfway between it is up, a height of 3. I don't have lines, so I'm just going to float a point up there. And then down 3. I got all the way to the 3 pi, so I'm done with the right-hand side, but I have more to do on the left to get over to that negative 2 pi. The length of the period is 2 pi, so 2 pi away from that starting line should be another cycle, so that's at negative pi. In the middle, it's in the middle, halfway between up and halfway between down. I still have not quite made it all the way to the markings. The middles are happening at every multiple of pi. I can look and see that I have a dot above 3 pi, 2 pi, pi, on 0 at negative pi. So I know at 2 pi I should have another middle. And to get there, it has to go down before reaching that middle. Your actual quiz will have 10 questions instead of 7, but it will look the same in format.